What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about the long-awaited and heavily anticipated Sirris suspension for your Surron Ultra Bee. All right, so before we jump into it, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is myself at Electrics Moto Co. I will leave the link in the description for you to go check out Electrics Moto Co, where you can buy anything you want pretty much for your Surron Ultra Bee or Surron Light Bee, including the Sirris suspension. Use the code ROAM at checkout to save yourself 10% on anything that you see on the site at any time. Okay, so we got all that out of the way. Let's talk about the suspension. I know a lot of people have been patiently waiting for their Sirris suspension to show up at their door, or for manufacturers and retailers in the United States to finally get their hands on them, other than the people that have already tested them. Well, I got mine in the mail 2 days ago, and I wanted to take it out of the box. And before I installed it, I wanted to make a video about what you can expect when you get your suspension. This is the first true moto style suspension that really exists for the Surron Ultra Bee. I know there are a lot of suspension options out there that are for the Surron Light Bee, but the Ultra Bee really doesn't have any support, any legitimate support for suspension options. And Sirris is the first one to kind of break that mold to bring a real moto, enduro, or trail style suspension to the Surron Ultra Bee. Now, there's a little bit of a backstory about the Sirris suspension guys that I'm not going to go too in depth on, but as I was talking to them on the phone, they were telling me about where they came from, about the things that they have done in the suspension world. And when they were telling me these things, I was super impressed to know that these guys all came from major suspension manufacturers and decided to step into strictly e-moto stuff to build the Sirris Suspension R43 and the F43 and R46 components for your Light Bee. So these guys, without going into too much detail, actually know what they're talking about. And when they were developing this suspension, they spared absolutely no expense to bring people a true moto, enduro, or trail style tune to the Surron Ultra Bee. So let's talk a little bit about what I got, what you're probably going to get in the mail when you get yours, and that is the F43 and the R46. They are, F43 is the forks, the R46 is your main suspension underneath the seat. Now for me, and I think what most people will receive, unless you choose a tune that is suited differently, you will receive the trail tune, and that's what I have. My trail tune is set for a rider weight with gear between 170 and 210 pounds. The nice part about the Sirris suspension, and when it comes to your door, you will also have access to the same installation manual that I have access to. It's more of a service manual, and it tells you everything that you need to know about your suspension and how to change the tunes accordingly. Now, when you purchase your Sirris suspension, you may choose an MX tune, or you may choose a hard enduro tune. But I would imagine that about 80 to 90% of the people will just go with the straight trail tune, because the trail tune is really perfect for guys who may ride the track but don't hit big jumps. Now, if you're hitting big jumps, you're going to need the MX tune, because the G-outs and the bottom out in your suspension will be significant, and you will probably break something if you're hitting big jumps and you have just a trail tune. So the trail tune is designed to take on trails, simple woods riding, or even track riding, but not big jump style track riding. If you're just riding a big track and you have a trail tune, but you're not hitting 30-foot doubles, you know, or big tabletops, you'll be fine to ride the trail tune. But if you want to change to an MX tune, you're going to need to know a little bit about suspension, but it has all of the documentation and information in the operator's manual that will show you exactly how to set the mid suspension underneath the seat, as well as your forks. So you can kind of change this on the fly depending on the style of riding you do, but also depending upon rider weight and how many people may share the bike. You know, you may have a brother or cousin who rides your bike on a regular basis that weighs 40 pounds more than you, and also depending upon where you sit in the seat. Motocross guys obviously sit way up on the seat. They're they're really good at keeping their body mass centered over the bike. But if you're just a regular trail rider or you're a bigger, taller guy with longer arms, you may sit way back on the seat, which will require some slight adjustments in the mid suspension and the fork suspension so you can have a really balanced ride and a really balanced feel while you're out doing the thing that you love to do, which is ripping your Ultra Bee. Now, before we get into next steps and we talk about what we're going to do in the installation process, I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on that, but there's something that I think you should know that you should really pay attention to. These forks and the mid suspension, it all has a break-in period, and the break-in period is roughly 5 hours. So what Sirris Suspension says to do when you get your suspension installed on your bike, first of all, have it installed by a professional, somebody who actually understands suspension and geometry and how it's supposed to be set up so they can set your sag up depending upon where you sit in the seat. There are a lot of intricacies to that. So if it gets shipped to your door and you just toss it on, if you're mechanically inclined, you probably won't have much of a problem, but it's something to take into consideration that you should find a shop like us in Columbus, Ohio at Electrics Moto. We can install your suspension for you, or find another shop that's close to you. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, you want somebody to be responsible to set this up who understands how the suspension works, and they can set it up for you before you leave. Now, the 5-hour break-in period, Sirris stresses that it's really important you do not change any of the settings for the first 5 hours. Even if they don't feel good, even if they don't feel comfortable, even if there's things that you would like to have differently, just make a mental note of that while you're riding. After the 5-hour break-in period and you've allowed these shocks, the oil to start moving and everything to start functioning as it should, then you can go in and start dialing in your own settings. Again, I would probably have that done by a professional, but if you understand suspension, you're more than welcome and more than capable to do this on your own. But it is something that you need to take into consideration before you start going out and ripping this thing. Changing settings prior to the 5-hour break-in period could just cause you more drama than you probably want to deal with. All right, so the next steps for us is just getting it installed. I'm going to start with the forks, and then I'm just going to ride the bike. I am taking the bike to the track tomorrow, and I want to have the forks installed. I don't think I'm going to have time to do the mid suspension underneath the seat before tomorrow, so I'm just going to get the forks installed because that's really the most delicate process here. The mid suspension portion only has 2 bolts. Excuse me. So you don't really have to worry about a whole lot. You just lift your seat up, take it apart, throw it in. Now, I guess I don't want to forget this. Sirris does send a new triangle with your suspension kit. And the reason for that is the factory triangle and some aftermarket triangles do come in contact with the spring if you try to use something other than the Sirris triangle. So that is something to take into consideration. If you already have one, you will have to change this out to make this fit. It's not non-compatible with all triangles, but I know the factory one, they did have issues with it rubbing on the triangle, so they just kind of completely eliminated that and built a new one, and they send it to you with your suspension kit. So if you have questions about ordering or you just have general suspension questions, I will leave the email for Electrics Moto in the description so you can email about questions about ordering, about price, about lead times, all of that stuff. Most of these suspension kits that have came in are already spoken for, but if you would like to get your hands on one, we will do our best to get them to you as soon as possible. Remember, anything that you buy on Electrics Moto Co., use the code ROAM and save 10% on literally everything. So don't forget that if you do intend to purchase from us there. Now, we have some work to do. I got to get the whole front end of this bike completely torn apart. I got to get the factory forks out, and I got to replace everything that's in there with the the forks that come from Sirris. So I'm super stoked to kind of bring you guys along for this. If you guys have any questions, particularly pertaining to Sirris or my Ultra Bee or any of the products that we offer on Electrics Moto, just leave that in the comments, send us an email, hit us up on Instagram. We will be happy to assist and answer any questions that we can. But until next time, I'm going to get to work, and I will see you on the next one.